Why did Ibrahim Traoré order 100 tons of grain seeds to be dropped from helicopters over Burkina Faso's barren savanna? At first, it looked like madness. A costly gamble. A bizarre stunt. Even whispers in the markets of Ouagadougou couldn't make sense of it. Traders told stories of low-flying military choppers, not carrying soldiers or weapons, but massive crates. Clouds of red dust rose as their rotors cut across the skies, leaving behind something far stranger than bullets or bombs. Seeds. Thousands upon thousands of seeds, maize, millet, peanuts, cassava, scattered across the cracked, sun-burnt soil of the Sahel. To the ordinary eye, it was chaos. Planting was supposed to be done carefully, by hand, in neat rows. But to a small circle inside the presidential palace, this was no accident. It was Traoré's boldest vision yet, an aerial seed drop that would change the destiny of a nation. 100 tons of life scattered into the wind, in what would become one of the most daring agricultural operations in African history. The official explanation was humanitarian, combating famine after years of failed rains. But the reality ran deeper. This was a calculated strike against food dependency itself. For decades, Burkina Faso had been at the mercy of imported grain, shackled to foreign aid, humiliated into begging for bread at someone else's table. Traoré wanted to end that cycle in one sweeping act. He knew the risks. Chartering helicopters cost millions. Drought-resistant seed varieties had to be sourced from across Africa. Coordinating hundreds of drop zones was a logistical nightmare. And critics, at home and abroad, called it reckless. They mocked it as a spectacle, a fantasy that birds would eat the seeds long before they grew. But Traoré had anticipated this. The seeds weren't random. Inside the mix were carefully chosen varieties bred by African scientists. Quick germinating millet that could sprout within days, deep-rooted cassava to hold the soil for months, and hybrid maize capable of surviving with little rainfall. Each was mapped to its perfect microclimate, with satellite data and soil grids guiding every drop. What looked like chaos was actually precision. The genius wasn't only in the science, but also in the politics. By executing the mission with domestic resources and African partners, Traoré denied foreign aid agencies any say. And by framing it as both food security and wildlife conservation, he made it politically toxic for outsiders to oppose him. Who could stand publicly against feeding the hungry and protecting the land? Yet the enemies of independence moved quickly. European and American grain lobbies warned of market destabilization. Aid agencies whispered ecological fears. And inside Burkina Faso, opposition voices spread rumors, expired seeds, poisoned crops, corruption in the palace. The foreign media laughed the loudest. French headlines declared, Traoré's folly, splashing satellite photos of barren earth, mocking the operation as nothing but dust and failure. But out in the countryside, far from the noise of Paris and Washington, ordinary farmers were waiting, watching, and praying. For weeks, the skies remained cruel and dry. Even Traoré's closest allies felt doubt creeping in. Then, on the 12th night, the first miracle arrived. Dark clouds rolled in. Heavy with rain, they broke open over the Sahel. A steady drizzle soaked the cracked land. When the sun rose again, faint green shoots pierced the soil. At first, almost invisible. Then, multiplying. In the semi-arid belts, millet spread in shimmering waves. In lowlands, cassava pushed through. In the west, maize stalks unfurled defiantly. The savanna was turning green again. This was not luck. This was design. Traoré's scientists recorded germination rates above 80%, even with little rain. Herds of gazelle and cattle began returning to forage where they hadn't grazed in years. Farmers spoke of renewal. But as the land revived, sabotage struck. A seed depot was torched in the night, flames erasing reserves for Phase 2 of planting. Witnesses saw foreigners fleeing the border. Military intelligence traced it back to mercenaries funded by a multinational agribusiness cut off from Burkina Faso's import contracts. It was proof of what Traoré already knew. The fight for food was a fight for sovereignty. The president responded with steel. New reserves were deployed under armed escort. Operation Iron Canopy was launched to flush out foreign operatives posing as NGO workers. Within weeks, 14 consultants were quietly expelled. Their laptops exposed contracts with lobbying groups and grain cartels. Traoré's enemies were no longer hiding their intent. They wanted his plan to fail before the harvest could crown him victorious, but Traoré thought ahead. He reached out to Mali, Niger, and Ghana, inviting them to join the seeding initiative. Suddenly, what had begun as a Burkinabe experiment became a Pan-African project. To attack it now was to attack a region. And while enemies plotted, Traoré moved faster, integrating new forage into livestock expansion, planning for meat, dairy, and soil renewal. Independence wasn't just about grain, it was about transforming the entire food chain. That's when the threats turned deadly. Encrypted communications intercepted in Abidjan revealed chilling orders. Harvest must not happen. Stop it at the source. Plots emerged to poison irrigation canals, to lace seed bags with toxins, even to assassinate Traoré himself. Security around the president tightened. Convoys were doubled, appearances cut back. But he refused to govern from fear. In a surprise visit to the town of Dori, he stood among farmers and told them, "No one owns the sky here except our people." His defiance electrified the countryside. Rural Burkina had become his fortress. Still, the attacks escalated. Foreign aid trucks were intercepted carrying pesticides disguised as cooking oil. A makeshift airstrip was discovered, prepared for firebombing maize fields. Grain storage hubs were targeted with explosives. But Traoré's decoys and intelligence networks turned each attempt into failure. When saboteurs blew up a fake depot filled with sandbags, Traoré appeared on television the next day, smiling in front of untouched real reserves. "Our enemies think in terms of destruction. We think in terms of protection," he said. The people roared with pride. The struggle climaxed as harvest approached. This was the moment everyone feared and hoped for. Fields once barren were now seas of green and gold. Maize heavy with kernels, peanuts thick on the ground, cassava leaves wide and strong. Villages that had lived under hunger now buzzed with laughter. Yet enemies made one last desperate push. Bribes to local officials. Threats to truck drivers. Poison plots for irrigation channels. Smuggling schemes to drain grain across borders. Traoré responded with Operation Harvest Shield. Armored escorts protected grain convoys. Special forces embedded with villages. Irrigation secretly rerouted through hidden pipes. Undercover agents infiltrated markets to catch traders. And when humanitarian trucks loaded with pesticides tried to sneak across the Niger border, they were intercepted before they could poison a single field. Then came the defining moment. Days before harvest, Traoré went live on national television, not from his palace, but from the heart of Kaya's green fields. Farmers, soldiers, herders stood at his side, crops stretching endlessly behind him. His words cut through the air like steel. This is not just Burkina Faso's harvest. This is Africa's harvest. And it will not be stolen. Across the continent, sympathetic media broadcast his speech. Volunteer militias sprang up, villagers forming human shields around fields until the crops were safely cut and stored. When the final convoys rolled into storage depots, sacks of maize stacked high under floodlights, the gamble was no longer a gamble. It was a victory. Even hostile media grudgingly admitted it, a logistical triumph under siege. But for Burkina Faso, it was more. It was dignity. It was the year the land fought back. For Traore, success wasn't measured only in grain tons or livestock expansion. It was measured in spirit. The people had faced drought, sabotage, and political warfare, and emerged not as beggars of aid, but as authors of their own survival. The aerial seed drop, once mocked as folly, had become the opening chapter of Burkina Faso's agricultural revolution. And as the president walked between mountains of grain sacks that night, under the glow of floodlights, he knew the war for sovereignty was far from over. But for the first time in decades, Burkina Faso was no longer fighting on an empty stomach. And in Africa's quiet war for independence, that was the most dangerous victory of all. So when foreign powers sneer, when lobbyists whisper, when mercenaries plot, remember this: a nation that can feed itself cannot be controlled. And a people who have tasted independence will never kneel again. And as always, if you believe Africa deserves to tell its own story, if you want the world to hear of victories like this, make sure to smash the like button, share this story, and subscribe to our channel. Because we are bringing you the truth about Africa's transformation, and together, we will make sure no one steals this harvest.